YouTube, it's Angie. So I've been trying to think of ways that I can whittle down my somewhat daunting TBR, which you can partly see behind me. That's a large chunk of it as far as my physical books. So I've been trying to think of ways to narrow it down, figure out what I want to purge. So I had the idea that maybe I could whittle them down by doing videos in sort of pairings. Maybe do a couple books by a certain author or a couple books in a certain topic. Because I noticed looking through my titles, I have a lot that sort of are related. And one of the topics I've seen requested, I do see a lot of you mention that you'd like to see more middle grade representation. And I was looking through my shelves and I do have a number of early childhood, like early readers books and middle grade and like young teen. So I was thinking maybe I'd start with those, do a few videos on those and sort of have some theme videos so I can have some discussion inspiration here. And so this video is sort of the start of that. I figured before I get into my holiday, mainly October reads, I guess, my fall and spooky reads and all that, I figured I'd squeeze a video in there about how we recently started a new school year. I don't have kids of my own, but I do have a lot of friends that are teachers and homeschool teachers and are always looking for titles they can bring to their kids or incorporate in their classrooms and that kind of thing. So this is the start of that. These are some titles I pulled that maybe primary school teachers or homeschool teachers might be interested in, or kids, or even if you're not a teacher, if you just have kids and you're looking for more titles to introduce them to, this is a start of that series. I pulled out a pile of books over here and I have them grouped by sort of subject matter. So judging from those piles, there should be, I don't know, 4 or 5 in this series to date right now that I have planned, but that's down the road. Most of October videos, as far as discussion videos, are probably going to be about my spooky reads that I do every October. So, getting into this, to start, a couple I've come across for just the teachers and parents. I came across Turkish Delights and Treasure Hunts, Delightful Treats and Games from Classic Children's Books by Jane Brackett. And this one was okay. There are, the majority of this seemed to be recipes, but it's kind of fun because it gives you recipes that you can do with your kids from classic childhood books. Like, I think there's recipes in here from Chronicles of Narnia, and I think Pippi Longstockings, and a few others you'll be familiar with. They're not coming to my mind right now, but there's a lot of recipes in there. I think they mentioned one from Winnie the Pooh and one from Little House on the Prairie, or a couple from Little House on the Prairie. But there's also a few games in here. The games I thought were kind of a stretch for kids now, as far as being inventive. I mean, she talks about, hey, you can go fly a kite with your kids. And I was like, well, you could do that. Most parents know they can do that. That's not really thinking outside the box as far as pulling games out of books. But she does mention a few in here that I was not familiar with. That she goes a little bit farther back than a lot of parents are probably going to be aware of now. She goes into some books from, like, I don't know, I think they date back to like the 40s or 50s. But there is some interesting stuff in here. This was probably about a 3 for me. I think it would be worth it just to get the recipes out of this, because there are a lot of good recipes. But the games they're kind of cute, but it was kind of the games were sort of a miss for me. But I will warn you though, I would recommend reading the recipes before you introduce them to your kids, because there are a couple in here that mention like working with pig's tails and pig hooves, and I don't know if kids these days are gonna be really able to handle severed feet on the kitchen table, like, hey, let's go have some fun, come on, it'd be great. So yeah, there is some good stuff in here if you want to check that out. One I finished recently is Fed Up with Lunch by, what was her first name? Sarah Wu. She has a blog by the same name. She used to go under Mrs. Q, I think. This is a story about a lady she's a speech pathologist and she's a special education teacher, and she started noticing basically the crap that kids were eating at lunch, and she was working at this school where not only had they taken out recess, but they had cut down the lunch period to 20 minutes, including time to stand in line. So the school started serving a lot of things that kids could eat fast or eat standing up, like chicken nuggets or chips or, you know, burritos in a cellophane pocket kind of thing. And she started seeing a correlation between what the kids were eating and how much energy they had afterwards. And when I was in school, the teachers used to bitch at us all the time because they would say things like, oh, you guys are useless after lunch, but nobody ever made the connection that it might be what we were eating. I was particularly interested in this because I grew up as a free lunch kid. Now I wonder how many of my health problems were exacerbated by what the schools were feeding me. But I didn't have a choice. My parents didn't have money to give me lunch every day. So she does bring up a lot of interesting topics as far as the history of the school lunch program, which I didn't know was started by the USDA. And I think she said in 1946 as a solution to... We actually apparently had a few food surplus in this country back then, and so they started a school lunch program to help feed the kids in schools, which it's like, how did we end up with a food surplus? When did that happen? I mean, look at the way we are now. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting history in here. Parts of it seemed a little bit more dramatic to me, or she was trying to make it more dramatic than it needed to be. Like, she acted like she was a, you know, Secret Service spy or something, and then she was going to get fired, and there was like a lot of emphasis on how she could lose her job at any moment, and I don't know if it would be that extreme just to say, hey, the lunches are crap. I mean, that's not a secret. That's been a running joke for years. But there is a lot of interesting and really good stuff she talks about here as far as food, school lunch reform. She also mentions how to make lunches in general more eco-friendly as far as the packaging and being more earth conscious and earth responsible and that sort of thing, which I thought was an interesting take because I hadn't really made that connection with lunches before. But she also includes a guide on how parents and teachers and students even can bring about reform in their own schools. So there's a lot of good stuff in this one. I forgot. She also puts in pictures of every meal she ate over the year, and what a lot of them repeat, but it does give you a good visual of what the average student could be eating now. But a lot of these pictures look pretty similar to what I ate in grade school. But the thing that cracked me up was she was talking about how she was getting feedback from around the world when she had her blog up, and some people from other countries were mentioning what their schools were feeding their kids, and she says, in Japan, school lunches could be made of whitefish, sushi, and rice dumplings, seaweed and tofu soup with kimchi in Korea, barley soup and bacon pate in Croatia, salad baguette with butter, cordon bleu, and creme brulee for dessert in France. Like, what the hell are we doing over here that we're eating, like, whatever, like mystery meat in goo sauce, and Japanese kids are getting freaking sushi, and French kids are getting cordon bleu? Like, I feel kind of gypped. So, yeah, this is a entertaining read. It's a pretty fast read. I mean, she has it set up in chunks that are easily digestible. Some of it runs on a little bit long for me, but I don't know. There's a lot of good stuff to think about with this. As far as young readers, I'd say, I don't know, first, second grade. I got this one recently because I liked the artwork in it. This is Abraham Lincoln Comes Home by Robert Burleigh. The paintings in this are done by Wendell Miner. I'll show you a couple of my favorites in here. The colors in here are just really striking. And let's see, like they have this one. This is basically the story of a little boy who witnesses Lincoln's funeral train going through his town. The colors are just... I liked it because the people look very lifelike in here, and all the pages are full color. But it's a nice introduction for small readers into American history without overwhelming them. And when I thought about that book, I also remembered I had Wild Women of the Wild West. And this one again, it has really cool artwork that I think kids are going to like. I mean, it's got a cute little dog on the back. But it talks about different important women throughout history, like Calamity Jane, Mary Fields. There's Mary Elizabeth Lease, public speaker. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting, just little bios. The bios themselves, if you're a real stickler, the bios themselves don't give a lot of information about these people, but for little kids, it at least introduces them to the names and maybe gets them interested to read more. But the illustrations are freaking gorgeous in this. Carrie Nation carrying a freaking axe with her. That's pretty funny. So, yeah, I would recommend this one if you see this hanging around. It's just a good starter into early history. Thinking about the theme of this video, I got into looking into my old Avi books again, because I was a big Avi reader when I was a kid. I don't think I had actually read this one before. It wasn't required when I was in school, but I read it out of curiosity, and it was pretty good. The story about this kid who he gets assigned to this one teacher's homeroom, and I don't know why, but they seem to have a beef with each other. Or he at least thinks the homeroom teacher has a beef with him, and he's just being himself, and she's just crazy and mean. And he gets her for not only homeroom, but also English. And I think it's in her homeroom class. They have a rule at the school that you cannot make noise or do anything while the national anthem is playing on the overhead speaker. It's just a standard rule. And he gets the idea that he's going to hum the national anthem, the U.S. national anthem for overseas viewers. He doesn't really give a reason why, other than I just felt like it. But this turns into this big thing because the teacher reprimands him a couple times, says, please don't do that, please don't do that. And the third time she says, all right, go to the principal's office. And she sends him to the assistant principal's office because I guess at this school the assistant principal is the one that deals with all the disciplinary stuff. And it's not a big deal, you would think. I mean, it's a kid breaking a rule. The teacher sends him to the principal's office. The teacher's been doing that for years. But it turns into a thing in this book because it involves our national anthem, and so people take it as, oh, we're infringing on this kid's patriotic rights, and she's suppressing his right to show his patriotism, and he should be allowed to express himself however he likes and that kind of thing. And all she's really doing is enforcing the rules, which is part of her job. But it turns into this big scene where he's made into this patriotic hero, and she has to fear for losing her job over doing her job. So I liked this book in that it brings up a lot of things to discuss as far as how far is too far with showing patriotism, and whose side are you on? Do you side with the teacher who is just following rules? Do you side with the kid? Did he do it in fact just to piss her off, or was he really into showing patriotism just out of the blue? I don't know, it just gives you a lot to think about. So I liked this one for the discussion value. And this was one of my favorites when I was a kid as far as Avi books go. This is Something Upstairs. This gives the story of a boy from Los Angeles, California, I think, and he moves to Providence, Rhode Island, which he points out the state of Rhode Island is so small that the city of Los Angeles will not fit entirely in it. But he moves into this historic house with his parents, and from the first night he starts seeing this ghostly shadows or weird shadows that he can't quite explain. Then the next morning just these weird splotches on the wood floors. And so they mention he takes it to his local pharmacy to have it analyzed. I didn't even know you could do that. Can you do that? I have never thought to take anything to my local pharmacy and hey, can you have this analyzed? And how a a young teen boy would think to do that. It's just crazy. But by the second night, he sees an apparition that fully forms, and the ghost introduces himself as Caleb, who was a slave who lived in the house and was also murdered, according to him, in the house, and specifically in the boy's room. Nice! And Kenny. Kenny is the boy's name. It becomes a story of Kenny trying to figure out what actually happened to Caleb and trying to set his soul at rest. Again, this is it's not super historically accurate, obviously, because it involves they write in time portals into the story and stuff, but it's a nice introduction into historical part. Goes back to the late 1700s, I think, around Revolutionary era slave trading. So it kind of brings that to light and maybe gets the ball rolling on kids learning about that. He uses one of those writing techniques where he starts the book as saying, this is actually a true story, which people have been using for hundreds of years when they write. But it's kind of a neat element to get the kids a little bit spooked out at first, like, oh, it could totally be true. So yeah, if you're not familiar with Avi books, I definitely recommend checking him out, because he has a lot of fun stories in his bibliography. And then recently, I also finished this book. I was actually really impressed with this book. This is one of those ones that's actually kind of dark, I thought, for a middle grade, but it's really good. This is The Last Book in the Universe by Rodman Philbrick. This is sort of like intro to dystopian for middle grade kids, and maybe just a hint of Fahrenheit 451 in this, at least inspired by, I thought. But this is a story of this epileptic boy named Spaz who lives in very dystopian, futuristic times. Nobody reads anymore. Everybody lives off of these virtual reality probes. And everybody lives in these communities called latches, where you basically live in storage boxes, it sounds like, or like freight boxes kind of thing. Spaz he doesn't know who his real parents are. He was taken in by a foster family at one point, but something happens and he gets banished from that latch into this other one. And all the latches seem to be run by these crime boss type people. And Spaz gets taken into a different latch, and he gets taken in by the gang called the Bangers. And the Bangers have a rule that you have to go steal for them from other people that live in the latch, and either you give them half of what you steal or you die. Like I said, kind of dark for a middle grade book. So under threat of death, Spaz goes and steals from different people, which is how he meets this old man. Old people in this world are called gummies. I guess because they don't have any teeth. I don't know. So he goes and meets this old man called Ryder, and Ryder has the last book in the universe. He's hiding it. He doesn't want anything to happen to his stories. So he meets Ryder, and shortly after gets word that his foster sister from his old family is near death. And so Spaz tries to go to the crime boss that leads the Bangers and said, can I leave the latch and go see her and find out what's wrong, because she's requested she gets a message that says she's about to die and you have to go see her now before it's too late. But the crime boss in his latch doesn't give him the permission to go, and so he has to sneak out of his latch, again under threat of death because nobody's allowed to leave, and go into other warring latches and try to figure out where his sister's at and what's wrong with her. And Ryder helps him get through some of the latches, and then they get into trouble, and they meet up with this prove called Lanaya, and the proves are genetically perfect people, while everyone else is just called normals. And proves and normals are not supposed to interact, or you can interact with them if they let you, but you're not supposed to. This kind of thing where, like, don't look them in the eye. You're not worthy. So he befriends her because he ends up saving her life at one point, and she helps him get to his sister faster. And so they have this whole big journey that the as far as the book part, it doesn't play a huge starring role in the story, but it kind of comes back around at the end and makes sense later. But again, there's a lot of good things to think about in here. It'll make kids sort of ecologically aware of the environment they're in, and how we have to take care of the planet. If you don't want to live in this environment where everyone lives in storage boxes and nobody can remember the days of clean water or grass, which is what Spaz lives in. And I also thought it was really cool that it's an adventure story that features an epileptic, because it's tough to find stories that feature people with disabilities. Not a feel sorry for him kind of story, but he actually goes in and turns things around for the better, and doesn't. He's never apologetic for the his disabilities or anything. He's just like, it's part of my life, I deal with it, and we move on. So I did like that part of it, so I definitely recommend this one. Finally, just for teenagers maybe that are starting college soon, if you've finished up school, or maybe you're an adult that wants to go back to school, if you're thinking about that, one book I recommend checking out is this one I read called Dare to Take Charge by Judge Glenda Hatchett. You've probably seen her on her reality court TV show.